Thank you so much, and welcome, GCU friends and alumni and colleagues. It's great that many of you took the time today to have this panel discussion. Just to introduce the theme for this year's International Women's Day, which is breaking the bias, and we've got very talented and accomplished group of women today that will be discussing how that bias is broken in communities and workplaces and schools and colleges, and of course in universities. I would like to hand it over now to Professor Alison Britton, Professor in Healthcare and Medical Law, and of course our GCU Aurora champion, who will be chairing the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona, for starting this event this afternoon. The lived experience is one of the most powerful ways in which to share information, and I am delighted to be working with 4 women this afternoon who will share their experiences of their life and some of the challenges that they have faced. It is through their stories and their accomplishments that they have found a voice for themselves and a voice to empower other women. Before I do this, I want to also acknowledge all of our thanks for those of us that have been involved in this fantastic event this afternoon, to our colleague Melanie Armstrong, whose idea it was to hold the event this afternoon, and my thanks to her for selecting such inspiring and engaging women, all of whom have given their time so generously to the Aurora Program. I now have pleasure to introduce the first speaker for this afternoon, my colleague, Professor Leslie McMillan. Leslie is a professor of criminology and sociology at GCU. Her research interests around gender inequality and crime and justice. Her research has helped reform police interview practice and rape survivors across the UK. And her work helps train police officers in Scotland on how best to respond to traumatised survivors of sexual violence. She is a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh and developed the groundbreaking Erase the Grey gender-based violence prevention campaign here at GCU. Leslie, I'm delighted and I'm very happy to hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. The theme of International Women's Day this year is breaking the bias, and today I'm going to talk about the work that we've done here at GCU to try to both prevent and respond to gender-based violence. The majority of my career in terms of research and teaching has been focused on gender-based violence and public protection research, and I've mostly been interested in how institutions respond to gender-based violence and how we can improve that. The risk with any theme for International Women's Day that needs to be captured in a single slogan, of course, is that it may inadvertently narrow down the focus of the problem to bias alone, when issues of gender inequality are actually far more complex. When we focus on bias, we're at risk of focusing only on the individual, suggesting if we simply change our attitudes, then everything would get better. With gender inequality, it's not that simple, as we find it's woven deeply into social, political, and institutional practices, and it manifests in multiple ways. Therefore, we need to seek change on multiple levels. Today, I want to outline how we've sought to make that deeper cultural and institutional change here at GCU. Firstly, though, it's important to understand the nature of the problem that exists across the whole of the higher education sector. Gender-based violence is both a cause and a consequence of gender inequality. It can take many forms, including rape and sexual violence, domestic abuse, stalking, sexual harassment, forced marriage, female genital mutilation, and child sexual abuse and exploitation. And with our increased use of digital communication technologies, it may take the form of non-consensual sharing of sexual images and unwanted sexual or abusive communications. It also manifests in the everyday harms of inappropriate sexual behaviour, use of inappropriate sexualised language, leading and catcalling. Gender-based violence is experienced disproportionately by women compared to men. It is not that men are not victimised, but the gendered pattern is very striking. Women make up the vast majority of those who experience it, and men make up the vast majority of those who perpetrate it. It's also an intersectional issue, and minoritised groups face a greater risk. Worldwide, the World Health Organization reports that 1 in 3 women has experienced either physical or sexual intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence in their lifetime. In the context of higher education specifically, the National Union of Students study Hidden Marks revealed 1 in 7 women students experienced serious physical or sexual violence during their studies, and over 2/3 experienced some form of sexual harassment. For staff too, a recent study conducted by UCU showed that 10% of staff in tertiary education experienced sexual violence in the workplace in the past 5 years, and a total of 39% had either experienced it, knew somebody who had experienced it, or had acted as a confidant to somebody who had experienced it. Gender-based violence restricts women's freedoms, and as such, it operates as a form of social control. It's both the threat and the reality of gender-based violence that contributes to women's more marginalised social position. Women tell us that they limit their use of social and public spaces because of a fear of gender-based violence. And as a society, we tend to responsibilise women to protect themselves from these harms, often vilifying those who fail to do so. At GCU, we have taken a committed stance to addressing the problem of gender-based violence, making a very clear commitment to both prevent it and respond to it. With areas as sensitive as this, institutional change can be difficult, as often there are fears of reputational risk if we publicly address these challenges. GCU has not taken that approach, but has stepped up to see the greater risk as being the harm to our students and our staff if we fail to respond in terms of preventing it happening and taking appropriate action when it does. Over the last 7 years, I've had the great pleasure of being academic lead for this work, which has allowed me to work with colleagues across many functions of the university, including our student body, to put in place a programme of work to break the bias of gender-based violence in higher education. Our programme of work to address gender-based violence has taken a number of forms that you can see here, underpinned by the principles of a collaborative, cross-institutional approach that is evidence-based with partnership working. We sought to address 5 main areas: reporting and disclosure, complaints procedures, support systems, awareness raising, and embedding a whole institution approach. We established a fully approved gender-based violence policy that makes a clear statement about how GCU addresses the issue. Our policy directly relates to our existing policies on both staff and student conduct and discipline. A key aspect of addressing this issue is education. We introduced peer-to-peer education, where trained peer educators engage with the student body to begin discussions on gender-based violence. We updated our student web pages so they can access information about prevention and support. We've also established a team of first responders across the university, fully trained to take disclosures from staff and students and signposts to support. More recently, we've introduced Report and Support, an online facility that allows both named and anonymous reporting of incidents. We've also seen ourselves as part of the wider community when it comes to gender-based violence prevention and response. This issue needs a community effort, and we have collaborated with all the universities and colleges in the west of Scotland to form Fearless Glasgow, a multi-institution consortium to share best practice. A significant part of our work is to raise awareness and seek cultural and attitude change. One of the major challenges we have when addressing gender-based violence is the myths and misunderstandings that surround it. These views allow it to prevail and contribute to its widespread nature. They also prevent people from disclosing violence when it happens to them, limit support seeking, and it also reinforces the harms of that violence. Our flagship Erase the Grey campaign that you see here, that was co-designed with students, seeks to promote cultural change by challenging these widespread myths. We now have a campaign with 23 messages addressing the full range of gender-based violence that runs regularly on the campus using posters, pole banners, and motion graphics on digital screens and social media. As part of our common good agenda, we make the campaign free under licence to any other organisation who wishes to use it, seeing our role as a civic university as extending beyond the boundaries of our own campus. To date, 12 other organisations have used the campaign, including universities and colleges and Police Scotland. The campaign has won a number of awards and commendations for its innovative approach to this aspect of gender inequality. Erase the Grey is doing its bit to break the bias of gender-based violence. Now, I am often asked how I cope with doing this sort of work that is often painful and challenging, where you see the worst of what can happen to people. And I think the answer is that I am at heart an optimist. I believe that change is possible. We often ask people whether they see a glass as being half full or half empty. My answer to this is always, it's neither. The glass is refillable. Sometimes we will have adequate resources to keep going. Other times we will feel depleted, but there will mostly be an opportunity to be refilled. And we also rely on others to help us refill our glass when we need it. I'm lucky to have colleagues who replenish my glass when I need it, and I hope I return the favour. It can be hard to get change in areas that are gendered. And as a political scientist, Fiona Mccrekey has argued, changes are often vulnerable to regress, as even when structures, policies, and processes are new, they are still nested in the wider environment with all the gender divisions and inequalities that preceded it. When it comes to reform and change, Cynthia Coburn has argued that there's a short agenda and a long agenda. Small gains in the short term may destabilise entrenched social structures enough to allow for achievement of longer term goals. On the face of it, with gender-based violence, there can seem a lot to be pessimistic about, but there is room for what Hester Eisenstein calls feminist optimism. Across society, there are deeply entrenched beliefs, divisions, and social and institutional structures with which we are grappling, and change may be slow, but the status quo is not inevitable, and continuing to push for change is all the more important. What we have achieved collectively at GCU shows both the difficulties of and the opportunities for change, and the importance of not writing institutions off. There are many good enough people working within institutions also pushing for change, and it's important to acknowledge that, and therefore the potential for further gains. If we're clear-sighted and realistic about how difficult change can be, it also allows us to appreciate the change that has already happened and continue to push for more. Our work at GCU is not yet done, and I know the full collective of staff who've committed a lot to this area will continue to work to break the bias and seek the change that we need. Thank you.
Leslie, thank you very, very much indeed. I particularly loved the last slide of half full, half empty, optimistic. Indeed, it's a very inspiring slide. The work that you've done is truly groundbreaking and generous insofar that we are leading the way, but sharing this excellent campaign with other institutions. Thank you. Delegates, just a gentle reminder that you can pick up any questions with Leslie and indeed all panel members later on. Thank you. So it is now my pleasure to make my next introduction for this afternoon. And this is the first of two newly appointed professors. And it is a great pleasure then to introduce Tulin Butaleb. Hello, Tulin, who is a professor in electronic engineering. Tulin's research interests are in mobile communication systems and vehicle communications, underwater wireless sensor networks, and smart cities with a focus on the Internet of Things. Tulin led the Athena Swan Bronze submission for her school in 2017 and currently chairs the Tackling Racism within our GCU group. A very warm welcome, Tulin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison, for that. I'm planning to go over my journey in STEM and really, go through the pipeline, basically. So I'm originally from Algeria. I grew up in the 70s and 80s in 8 countries around North Africa, Middle East, and the Gulf states. I always wanted to be a vet. When I finished my baccalaureate, my dad had his friend on the phone, and his friend happened to be an engineer. And he told me at the time, electronic engineering is the future, it's exciting, and really highly recommended it. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to take that advice. My influencer at that time is a man, and I'm really glad that I did take it. And it's absolutely fascinating to really do research and lecture in electronic engineering and in telecoms engineering. So at the time when I started, 1991, started my degree, I really never knew about the gender divide in that subject area. So I went first day in my degree, and there was 200 in the classroom and 10 were girls. It really kind of went well throughout with super classmates. But there were always, some of these comments, for example, when we would be working in a lab, like, are you going to break a nail, for example? It's the case that really minority that get, but it is definitely targeted at female. So 10 years later, started my lecturing, and I was like, oh no, there are no girls sometimes in my classroom. Sometimes I have levels of where there are basically no girls at all. So even now, even when you look here at the 2018-19 and the graph in front of you, only 1 in 5 of all engineering and technology entrants were women in 2018, as I've mentioned. Keep in mind that in that particular year, women accounted for more than half, so 57% of the student population overall. So really a kind of very gradual improvement. So from 2019 sitting at 16.3%, but still really a lot of work there that needs to be done. What I've definitely saw in me and the female students in that journey throughout the degree is the support that is really needed. So you can see there, that's myself starting at Glasgow Caledonian University, my electronic degree in 1991. So you can see I'm the student union there, being my usual goofy self. And then 4 years with the support of the university, the lecturers, and the classmates. As you can see, in the middle there, the graduate confident person. And then the support continued after that from my supervisors while I was doing my PhD studies. And then when I started lecturing with my colleagues and the university to what you currently see me there. So supported throughout. And that's really important. You can see there the pipeline that I really wanted to mention. And that is my school, so the School of Computing Engineering and Built Environment, and you're looking at the percent by gender in there. If you look from 2016 to 2019 and maybe just focus on the professor and the senior management group, so that would be the SMG in there that you can see. And especially in 2019, how this gap is really closing. And that's really impressive, and a lot of targeted work went on the staff side. But as you can see at the other end, where it's really still affected by the societal impact and influencers of parents and teachers and so on, is really that where we would want to also target to have a nice flow throughout between the undergraduate, taught, postgraduate researchers and lecturers and so on. So in here, what we really need to think about is it's not really all about only numbers. So obviously with the staff, you've got the working environment, a really good working environment for men and women in that case. But also when we wanted to have the school girls really to be well informed of what does it mean to have a STEM career. You want to have things that they are impacted by women. So you want really to STEM basically shaped by women. When you look at a number of global challenges that we have, it's you really want to have an input and an impact by women. So they are designing what works for them, what is good from their own perspective. For example, climate crisis and its impact on women. When we are walking in the street at night and in parks, taking public transport, what can we do in order to feel safe? What can we do on the electronic engineering side, on the mechanical engineering side? What can we actually do in order to affect and impact our life? So it is really this being well informed and having that information to the school girls that are really, really important. So we do a lot of activities to inspire schoolgirls and boys, such as the one that you'll see in a minute, and that is on the Smart STEMs. So that's in collaboration with Smart STEMs charity. We started that in 2015, so we get 500 girls on campus and initially have some talks by role models, and then have them in labs throughout the day, experiencing a number of different workshops, so all hands-on workshops, so they can basically know what does it mean maybe to be an electronic engineer, or to be in construction, or in audio technology, or in cybersecurity. So really experiencing a number of different disciplines in STEM, in engineering, specifically technology, as well, and math. So really, really excellent, full day activities. And also we've started from last year to also have boys in there, and that would be really absolutely excellent. Another example of our activities is residential programs with the Engineering Development Trust. So the Smart STEM is really targeted at an earlier stage, so that's really from primary 6, 7, S1, S2. And the idea is really to inspire them before they do their subject selection at school, where this particular one, so that's residential for boys and girls, that is later on, so that's when they're 15 to 17 years old. And what you can see in there is they basically work in teams. They've got a challenge, they're given a challenge, and they're not only just developing their technical skills, so you can see they're even including welding and workshops, different workshops, to coding, but also they are developing their soft skills, so their communication, working in group, presenting at the end, for example, the solution to their challenge. And it's really good to have this and get them inspired. And I think, although I've said, from 1991 till now, very slow, move in there with regards to having more girls in STEM, I really do believe that at the moment, having schools, universities, industry, government, everyone is on board. I'm hoping that it will definitely make a difference. But the problem is that we don't want to inspire the boys and girls in one day or a few days, and then for them to be discouraged by their parents and teachers. So we try and target also teachers, having events for teachers. That particular event there that you can see, Inspire Higher by 9:20, it was hosted at GCU. So the words there, inspire, is to inspire, and then higher. So the focus is you're wanting to inspire children, and obviously them having their parents with them, also looking at how the focus is on future careers. So the hope is really more that we would influence the influencers and influence the parents in order for them to see a number of different opportunities there for kids, and hopefully not to discourage them. So my challenge, as a final thing, my challenge to the audience that they are on today is really, how are you going to break the bias? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Talene. The personal insights, and I loved the photograph from your time as a student at GCU. That continuity and giving something back to the community as well is is inspiring. Thank you for sharing your story. And again, for those delegates, you can pick up on any questions that you would care to ask Tulin later. Moving on, in terms of our next speaker, the second of our newly appointed professors, I am delighted to introduce Professor Sharon Dolan. And Sharon joined GCU from the University of Glasgow in 2003 as a lecturer in physiology and pharmacology. Sharon's research over the last 25 years has focused on understanding the neuronal mechanisms of pain and analgesia. In 2018, she diversified a little by becoming head of department of the biological and biomedical sciences. And in 2019, she was promoted to a reader in neuropharmacology. She leads the School of Health and Life Science Athena Swan agenda and is passionate about supporting young women in science. Sharon's talk today will focus on the positive influence that role models and mentors have had on her career over the years and how she is now trying to do the same for the people that are following in her footsteps and her career. Sharon, it's a pleasure to welcome you. I can hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks very much for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and be invited to this event along with such esteemed female colleagues. So the picture from my school is maybe quite different from the one that Tulin has described. But what I wanted to talk about was some of the challenges that our discipline face are still similar. So women's career progression is still a challenge in our area. So what I've got here is some data from my department, the Department of Biological and Biomedical Sciences. So what we have in our department is over 60% of students and staff are female. And then if you look at the school as a whole, the number of females actually increases. So female representation for student population in the school is almost 80%. And for our staff members, that 72% are female. So you might ask, well, what's the bias? What's the issue here? But Tulin has very nicely introduced the career pipeline, sometimes known as the Leaky Pipeline, rather unfortunately termed, I think. But I hope you can see some of the data on this slide. It's not too small. But the important thing to emphasise here, even in our discipline in health and life science, there is a reduction in the number of females represented as they move through the career pipeline. So, for example, when we move from lecturer to senior lecturer up to reader and professor, the number of females represented decreases. So clearly there's still a need to address that balance in career progression. Why are women and females not getting into leadership positions, and what are the barriers preventing them moving to senior positions? I would just say the very last point on the graph, which is SM, senior management, that is reflective of the gender balance within the school. That's why there's a little peak there. So where does the bias come from then? So again, I hope you can see this little slide. When I put into Google the term professor, it was quite stark, quite interesting, the results that came back. So of 60 little images that popped up, there was only one that was of a woman. And even that image, which is right in the centre, you might not be able to see it very clearly. She came after a duck and an owl. Of course, I was hoping for a laugh there if I was in a real lecture theatre. So yeah, so the woman is after the duck and the owl, and she's actually wearing a very nice tight-fitting dress as well, just to add to things. So stereotyping, implicit bias is very common. It comes from our upbringing. It also comes from media portrayals of scientists. and cultural conditioning. But before I move on then to talk about my own influences and role models and mentors in my career, I do want to just mention that last week, the promotions round was announced, and of the 8 new professors announced, 6 of them were female. So I think GCU are definitely trying to address this balance. I listened to the principal's address on Twitter today for International Women's Day, and she did mention that at GCU 40% of professors are female. So clearly we're not quite there yet, but we're certainly going in the right direction. So what can we do to break the bias? So what I thought I would do is just explore my career journey and focus on some of the positive role models and mentors that I've had in my career over the years. Now, I could spend quite a bit of time going through this career journey, so I was just going to pick out a few highlights. But I was delighted last week to add a little extra rung, a little additional step to the ladder when I got appointed professor. So that was a highlight of my career. But I started my higher education journey in Glasgow University, where I went to study for a BSc in developmental biology. And then I moved to the University of Stirling to do a PhD in neuropharmacology. My first job was at Glasgow University Vet School. And this is where I first started working with sheep and developed my love of sheep, as many people who know me might know that. So it was here, though, that it was really important time in my career. Really had a chance to work alongside a number of really high-achieving female academics. Many have went on to have hugely successful careers. Julie Fitzpatrick, Chief Scientific Officer, Andrea Nolan, who's my first boss at the University of Glasgow, and also a very own Linda Scobie. So Professor Linda Scobie was a colleague of mine at the time as well. So Linda's now Deputy Head of Department and Research Group Lead. But really probably one of the most inspirational individuals that I came across at this early career stage was Andrea Nolan, because she was a mother of 4, a researcher, a vet. She brought her 2 dogs to work, particularly Stinky, under her desk in the office. But Andrea was a great mentor, and still is actually to me. But she became head of department quite quickly after I started working with her. And then in 1999, she became appointed Dean of the Vet School. But she was the first female Dean of Glasgow University. So you can imagine it was quite a memorable event at the time. But really what it had quite a fortunate consequence for me, because it meant with her moving to that position, I had to quickly become quite independent, and I was left to basically lead the research project. So from there, then I moved on to a first permanent position at GCU. That was 18 years ago now, so it doesn't seem so long ago. But the 1st of January 2004, I started the job here, and that was along with 4 other lecturers. So it was a really exciting time again for GCU. We were appointed, the 5 of us, on the back of a really successful Research Excellence Award. That was the RAE 2001. The money at that time came to the department, which allowed the department to employ 5 new academic research active scientists. So 3 of us are still here, actually. There was Professor Graham and Dr. Martin and myself are still here. As a young female in academia, it was really important to have these allies. Both Professor Graham and Dr. Martin are slightly ahead in their academic career journey than I, so they provided a great deal of support. And it's really important to have that comfort and shared experience when you're starting out on a new post. So then in 2009, I was appointed senior lecturer, and I did find myself a bit of a crossroads. So although I was carrying on with my research and PhD students, supervising PhD studentships, I was offered a position to move into a subject lead position. And that was started my path down a slightly different way than I had expected, and moved into leadership. And I've never really looked back since, I would say. So I then moved on to become assistant head of department under the head of the department at the time was Professor Anita Simmers, who I've gained loads of advice and help from in my own career path. Anita's now went on to be dean, so it's really important to have that female role model and leader that you can look up to. And then I went on to become head of department, so that's almost maybe 3 years ago now. So I've been head of department of biological and biomedical sciences. But just, I say, it's a kind of whistle-stop tour of my career, but I've been really fortunate to have some truly inspiring individuals to work with, role models and mentors. And this is both males and female mentors. And I think what's important is not to be afraid to ask for help, because even now, I still have some really important and mentors that I know that I can ask for help at any time. So I'm just thankful to these role models and mentors that have helped me on my career journey. So just the final slide then is perhaps what's more important to me now in my position is how to inspire the next generation of young women, early career researchers and academics to become leaders, to have the confidence to move up that pipeline, the career pipeline. So without doubt, this will require cultural change. So establishing role models as standard and not just an odd token one. Embedding mentoring programs. So this is important at every step of your career journey. As I say, even now, I have mentors that I can call on and ask for advice. Inspiring young women and scientists. So Dolan gave some great examples of how she's doing that in her discipline, in her area. But you should never underestimate the positive influence that you can have on a young person's career and a young person's choices. And finally, the last thing I wanted to mention was an initiative that the university is involved in, the Aorta Program. So this is a really important way of supporting women into leadership positions. It's an advanced higher education program that was developed for women back in 2013. It first started, and I was really lucky to be on the first cohort. So there was 4 of us actually on the first Aorta program in 2013. But since then, there's been 130 women, both academic and professional services, have went through the program. And in fact, this year we have 13 participants. And I'm really delighted to see that 3 academics from my own department are on the program this year. So I'm now a mentor on the program. It's really important to me to be able to support, as I say, young women and scientists in their career, just giving them the confidence and the leadership skills to develop. So I think that's probably all I wanted to say. Just that it's important to give time to support mentees to help maximise their talent, just as I've been fortunate enough to have. So I will end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Sharon. A very inspiring story. And I think also I particularly loved your slides of your career development. They're very visual. That's a very happy sheep on the third slide there. But the idea that sometimes you have to change a little bit of direction. You don't always maybe end up where you thought you'd end up, and you go with the flow and other opportunities open up. But you have been a stalwart in terms of developing the community for Aurora and for those who are wanting to develop their careers, understand the powers of these networks. And you can never underestimate how powerful that can be, and the fact that you want to have somebody there to share, to take advice from. And I think it works both ways. I think we learn a lot as mentors and role models from the people that we work with. There's always a new perspective and something new to learn as well. But thank you so much. And again, for our delegates there, you are welcome to ask any questions of Sharon once we have heard from our final speaker. So that brings me on to our final speaker, as I said, this afternoon, before we take some questions. And that is Julie Adair. Good afternoon, Julie.
Hi, Alison.
And Julie is currently the Director of Communications and Digital Engagement here at GCU. But she didn't start out as that and didn't join us as that. She actually joined in 2014 to develop a particular digital project, which was entitled The Common Good First. And this project was so successful that it ended up winning 1 million euros of the EU Erasmus Plus money. And Julie led this wonderful initiative along with a range of universities in Europe and South Africa. In her contribution this afternoon, Julie will touch on some of the people that she met during this time and what she learned during the 3 years of the Common Good First project and her many visits to South Africa. Julie, it's a great pleasure, and I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you very much for having me on this panel. I first discovered actually Women's Day when I was in South Africa in 2016 in a place called Glasgow, which is formerly known as Port Elizabeth in the Eastern Cape. And I discovered it when I went out for breakfast in a cafe around the corner from my hotel. I was doing that very Scottish thing of not paying a lot of money for a hotel breakfast. And I came out to the Caffeine Cafe. And because it was Women's Day, they gave all the ladies who came in for their breakfast or their coffee that morning a free cupcake. And that was the first time that I discovered Women's Day, a little bit late in my career, but there we go. The eagle-eyed among you will spot the date of this. South Africa does not celebrate Women's Day in March, but in August, on the 9th of August every year. And I thought I'd just explain to you a little bit about why that is before sharing some stories about some of the people that I met in South Africa over the period of the Common Good First project. In every August on the 9th, every August the 9th, South Africa marks Women's Day, as I said, and it pays tribute to over 20,000 women who marched to the Union buildings in Pretoria, which is the official seat of the South African Parliament. The pictures that you're going to see here are quite grainy, possibly because of the time and possibly also because I don't think this was an event which had much press coverage at the time. But what you'll see here is a number of women, and there were a lot, who went to the Parliament on that August day to protest the extension of pass laws to women. This was already legal for men, that they had to have a passbook to travel from different parts of the city of Johannesburg and across the country. So what it meant was women living in the urban townships had to carry passbooks when they came from their home to their place of work. And they had to pay to renew them every month, which was quite a considerable expense. Tens of thousands protested, many for the first time in their lives. And this mobilization is celebrated every year in August, on August the 9th, to commemorate this event. And it's a public holiday in South Africa, and a number of events take place every year. Now, last August, I spoke at an event at the University of the Free State to honor this woman, Charlotte Mccrekey. I don't know if any of you have heard of her, but Charlotte led the way in establishing the African National Congress, or the ANC's Women's League, in 2013. She encouraged South African women of all colours and all backgrounds to engage in the struggle for freedom. She was also the first Black South African woman to earn a university degree in 1903, albeit at a university in America. This is one of the most famous quotes from Charlotte, and it's one that I think is particularly pertinent today, as it was when she was at the centre of last year's South African Women's Day. And I'm going to come back to that to talk a little bit about people I've met in South Africa who I think live that. So last year, 2 years ago, just before the pandemic, I travelled to South Africa and to the University of the Free State to a community event which celebrated both Common Good First, but also the work of engaged scholarship and community engagement in South Africa. And the colleagues surrounding me here are Sharon Venter, Chlope Khomezulu, Modi Matsoso, and Deirdre van Gooyen. Karen and Deirdre were on Common Good First with me, and Ma Matsoso, that you see to the left there of Chlope, she runs the community engagement team at the University of the Free State. And I've always been incredibly impressed with the way that community engagement is set up in South African universities, and particularly among the universities I worked with across the country from 2016 to 2019. There is a huge amount of work taking place to go out into the townships and across the areas where the universities are based. And in this case, the University of the Free State, their campus in Kwakwa, is in the very rural part of the Free State. And from this event, I went on to visit a number of women-run initiatives and projects across the surrounding area. This is Puta de Chaba, which is a sprawling community of 60,000 people in the shadow of the Drakensberg Mountains, which you can see behind there. Poverty is very high, but the community works hard to develop their own solutions to challenge many of the problems which affect them. University of the Free State works a lot with people in this area, including this project. This is the Etemolang Soy Project. And the lady on the far left there is a lady called Mrs. Mabutu Makwa. She's in her 70s, and she leads a group of local women in the township where they take soybeans, traditionally grown only to be used for animal feed, and turn them into cheap and highly nutritious products like soya milk and soya bread. In fact, that machine that you see on the left there, she calls that her metal cow, because what happens is the soybeans are crushed down, milk is made, and then that is turned into yogurt and milk. And then the beans themselves, or the remains of the beans, are used to make bread and muffins. And these are then used for school lunch schemes, as well as for sharing with older people in the community. And many of the women that you see here left school at a young age. And as part of the project, they were given training in agricultural and food production techniques. And where they can, they then pass these skills on to other women in the community. It was a real privilege to meet the women in this project and see what they were doing. And they, like my colleagues at UFS, are absolutely working to the maxim of raising women up as they rise up themselves. And before I just end with a couple more quotes, I just wanted to share with you a picture of the soy muffins. There they are. The soy muffins, very high in protein, quite dense, but really delicious, were then tasted at the community seminar that I spoke at earlier. They were very delicious. In fact, the one I had lasted for several days, but it is a bit like carrot cake. But these are the kind of things which are then passed on to schools for kids' lunchbox and to the elders in the community. So finally, let me come back to Charlotte Mccrekey and this wonderful phrase, if you can rise, bring someone with you. And there's two things that I think I've learned over my career in the media and then in the last few years at GCU. First, you must believe in yourself. I'm sure a number of you on this call were at Jackie Main's workshop yesterday on the imposter syndrome. And if it's not something you've heard about, look it up, because there's a real thing, I think, among women about not believing in ourselves, thinking that we're somehow a fraud and will be discovered at any given point. And we had some great conversations among a range of colleagues here at GCU about what that actually looks like and feels like. So if you're going to rise and bring someone with you, believe in yourself and believe in your capacity to help them. And then the final thing, and I've been working across, as I say, a range of different workplaces over my long career. When you meet people, keep in touch with them, grow your network and share it. And if someone comes to you and says, I'm wondering how I can find out more about this, or I want to learn more about how to work in this space, look up your virtual Rolodex, look up Outlook and connect them, grow your network and share it. Thank you very much for inviting me today. Happy Women's Day to everybody. And I hope you enjoy the rest of this session.
Thank you very, very much indeed. I love those slides, and I haven't had any lunch yet. The muffins look quite delicious, I have to say. So I am now going to invite my other colleagues to come back and join me on the virtual panel. Here they come now. And Julie, you can just bring your camera back on for us so we can see you. Thank you very much. And just to remind the delegates that if you would like to post any questions for our panel, we will be running now until just before 3:15. And Sinead Stevenson, my friend and colleague who is working in the wings here, is making sure that we manage to cover as many questions as we possibly can. For those of you who have put some comments in the chat box, I might not be able to get to these, but if you would like to go offline for any support or networking there, we would be very happy to help you with any signposts or anything that we can offer in terms of our knowledge, experience and life and times. But I'm going to turn to one of the questions that have come in earlier. I'm going to read this out. Excuse me, I'm just on the other screen here. And one of the questions has come in from Helena Fisher, who said, how have you personally managed the balance between progressing your career and staying authentic to yourself in a gendered biased workplace? And I think all the panel could probably have a good go at that. But I'm going to, Talene smiling, yep, you're it, Talene. I'm going to at least start with you and see what you're going to tell us in relation to that. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. It's an excellent question, and it is challenging, especially, I mean, I probably will start with what Julie ended up with, and this is believing in yourself is one thing, because, you know, you're almost, and especially being, for me, if you're looking at intersectionality here, an Arab women engineer, you know, it is, when you're working in an environment in engineering, you always need to prove yourself that you can actually do that job. You can be as strong, as confident as you want, but you're still constantly needing to do that. So it is quite a challenge. I think for me, the main thing is that if you align what is important to you and your values to your career progression. So I think a lot touched on, Sharon, for example, touched on that with regards to it. The more that you are progressing in your career, if it's tying with what's important to you, what your values are, then the more that you are giving back and giving to others. So the more that you are able to mentor, whether it's undergraduate, PhD students or colleagues, you know, everyone else in so many areas, the more that you are able to give back to society, for an engineer to do for the environment. So it really kind of ties, I think, in my opinion, is try your best to align what's the values, what's most important for you into that career progression. And then you're not in you know, it's the word, I think it was used, Alison, if I'm right, is how do you balance? I think it wouldn't become a balance, it'll become a natural thing that you are really feeling, you know, I'm in a leadership position, so I can actually give more. I have more responsibilities, I can actually do much better. That will be my take on it.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody else like to briefly come in before I move on to the next one? It was a very full, comprehensive. I like that it becomes natural rather than actually thinking about managing that balance there. Thank you, Talene. Well, I will move on then to one of our other questions, and this comes from Jana Omar, and she said, what's the biggest challenge you've ever encountered as a female in a leadership position, and how were you able to break that ice ceiling? And again, maybe you could all answer that. I'm sure you could maybe have a think of it, but I'll ask Leslie if she'd like to come in first of all to lead us in a response to that. Leslie?
I suppose to the first part of the question, the biggest challenge probably for me has been learning how to delegate. Actually, it doesn't come easily to me. Some people might say I'm a control freak and just want to retain control. That may be partly true, but I think also it's quite a gendered pattern where you can get used to sort of taking responsibility for everything, taking everything on, and it's hard then sometimes to go to others to ask for help or pass some of that responsibility over. But I think if you don't learn to do that, then you could end up overburdened, and I think you then end up denying opportunities to other people as well. But I suppose in what I've tried to do in learning how to be better at delegating is to try to make sure that when I do that, I'm making it an opportunity for somebody and not just a burden for somebody. So when we are asking for that support with work, we're bringing people into teams to work with us, that we aren't being exploitative ourselves, that we're making sure that actually that is an opportunity for them. And a bit like Julie said, that you are pulling people up and along with you, as opposed to just passing that labour down the food chain. And I think in terms of breaking glass ceilings, honestly, partly luck. I think being the right place at the right time. I think sometimes I'm wary of, I suppose, a narrative that some of us, it's because of attributes only within ourselves that we're able to progress, whereas actually sometimes it is the right place at the right time. But I think a lot of it has been about, for me, having really good colleagues who pushed me forward, pulled me up, supported me, and brought opportunities to me that I wouldn't otherwise maybe have had.
Thank you. And it was an inspiring quote, Julie. I really like that. It was a lovely way to end that. Thank you, Leslie. I've got a couple of questions coming in as well. This is a question for Sharon. Do you have ambition to be a vice chancellor like your mentor, Professor Andrea Nolan? And it did not come in from Andrea Nolan.
Of course.
One of our other colleagues here.
Yes, of course I have. I think it's just important to have the choice. As I said earlier on in my career, deciding to go into a leadership position, it was quite a big decision at the time. And I think it was actually quite difficult to admit that perhaps I might be more suited or better going down a leadership role than sticking to purely research. Not to say that I still do research, but it's not 100% of my role at the moment. So I think, and also it's the perception of other people, like, well, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to be head of department and take on all that responsibility? Because it's a very interesting job, and there's never a dull moment in head of department, but I think you do need to be a certain type of person to deal with the pressures and the variety of things that come your way that you have to deal with quickly and fairly. So I think I enjoy being head of department. I enjoy being in a leadership role, but getting the professorship is probably it's opened the door it's given me more opportunities. So in a year's and a half's time, I've got the option, if I want to perhaps follow in my dean's footsteps, become vice dean, up towards vice chancellor role one day, or perhaps go back and concentrate on my research. So I think just having that option of taking the time to think, well, what do I want to do it's good.
Thank you, Sharon. And I noticed Anita's just putting some fairly inspiring comments on the chat there as well. So thank you very much, Anita, who is the dean of your school as well. I think something I'd maybe like to ask all of you, given we are celebrating International Women's Day, and these are all been quite personal stories and that you've been good enough to share with us today. Do you have anyone in particular that you would point out as inspiring you, playing a role as a mentor, a role model along your journey, at any part of your journey? All pausing and having a quick think about that there.
I think from my point of view, because I didn't come through the university track in terms of my career. I did a very similar course or initiative at the BBC many years ago to Aurora, and it was a women's development initiative. And I think the thing about that was that, rather like I think many of the Aurora attendees get, is a lot of very senior women in the BBC and beyond, in politics and in industry, came to talk to us in a very Chatham House rules way. So whatever they said was kept in the room. I couldn't pinpoint any one or even two people that inspired me, but what I think is essential to younger women coming up is seeing what senior women are saying and hearing from their experience, whether that's in some of the stuff we talked about at Jackie's session yesterday about what it feels like to come back to work after having a family, what it feels like as you embark on your career progression, as my colleagues all have. But I think the important thing is that senior women find the time to share their experiences with younger women coming up. And for me, hearing that some of them were human, some of them had the same challenges that I did, was the thing that really kept me going. And there are a couple of women, they wouldn't necessarily be known to people on this call, but there are a couple of women who I've had as both line managers and mentors who have been inspirational to me. And I often do that thing of saying, what would X do? And how would she deal with that? Because they're the ones who I hope I've modeled my leadership persona on. So I think my answer to that would be not any one person, but a lot of people, and keep asking to hear their stories.
That have brought different strands at different times throughout your journey.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a nice way of looking at it. But it's continuous. It's not as if it's just one and then you. No. Anybody else want to come in? And then I've got a couple of other questions just to close us off today. Anyone else want to come back about role models or mentors there?
I think just very similar to what Julie mentioned, really numerous people, but I think just really going to my mom and dad, they are my best inspiration, initially, and even in the work ethics and, all of that really came from them.
Yeah. So, and I think that's right. And I think it doesn't only need to be, yes, it could be men or women. I think that's important. And very often the person doesn't need to be more senior. They can just be inspiring simply for who they are. It's not age related and very, very often not gender related either. A question that maybe follows on from that there, Ash put into the chat box. Very often we do have male colleagues that want to be supportive. Sometimes, not always, that may work the other way, but very often they are. How do we engage our male colleagues in supporting us fully to the point that gender bias doesn't become an issue? What advice would we give them?
So Alison, just because when you were introducing me with regards to the Athena Swan and the work within my school, I mean, it was really from the start a bit of a challenge, but I think once men understand the issues that we are facing, they really start to think, okay, we would definitely like to be on board and try to support you, because once we create, a better environment, it's not only going to be just for women, it will be for men and women, that they would both benefit. So I think maybe initially just really highlighting what are the real issues that in itself will start, opening eyes. So raising awareness would be really my first thing to recommend.
Thank you. Any other colleagues want to come in at the point? No, I would agree. I think that idea of raising, because it's all about building communities, but it's also about communication as well, isn't it? Sharing that information, because very often we all present very different personalities outwardly to maybe how we're feeling inside as well. And I know that Jackie will have raised that yesterday too. So many people don't know when we're struggling, when we need advice, unless they get to know us, they take the time to know us, and we have the confidence to be able to share that information as well.
But also, sorry, Alison, but also
no.
Acknowledge that there will be minority that no matter what you say, they're not going to change their mind, and you really need to accept that. And sometimes I would say also challenge any comments, behaviors that come, because it's not only just, you're not challenging it just because of you know, there are other younger potentially women, or they have just started their career, and you are really creating that better environment for them as well. So it's important to challenge, in my opinion, to challenge any of these behaviors or comments, so they don't put off people that they might just start and then, you know, they say, oh, I can't work in that environment. So
no. And I think we all want to have a community, an environment that we want to come to. We give so much of our time to work and our working life. It's really important that we enjoy it. And given what's happened over the last couple of years, that we have been consigned to working and engaging with each other online, we've had to learn a whole new set of skills, and being inclusive and having that time for small talk, the way you would have if you passed somebody's office, has very much been just forgotten. We're just so engaged on being online. So I think these are skills that we need to bring back and make sure we take forward with us. So a final question then, I'm mindful of the time. Do you think celebrating International Women's Day, and obviously the range of events that we have this week, is that important? Is this something that we need and should be doing?
Yes.
Yes.
I think
more, Leslie, please, more.
I think a lot of what it is about awareness raising, though, isn't it? It's like people can tick along quite happily in their own little bubbles if they're not directly affected by something, it's not happening immediately in front of them, and actually raising the awareness of these. I mean, they are deeply entrenched social structures, and we can all do our own part, but there's bigger shifts that need to happen within our institutions, within our societies across the board. And if we don't draw attention to it and raise awareness, then we will never manage to achieve that. So I think that is, you know, and the frequent retort you always find to why there's an International Women's Day, or why is there not an International Men's Day? Well, as it happens, but it is, I believe it's somewhere near the end of the year. But that somewhat misses the point, because what we're talking about is people who have a more marginalised social position. Men enjoy more rights, more freedoms than women do, and that's what we're trying to challenge in the way that we can, and that's why drawing attention to it really matters, I think.
And I think as well, Alison, rather like Sharon did in her presentation, it's a time for us to sit back and reflect on where we've got to, and also the people that have got us here. And I know that that's something that I've seen a lot on social media today, is people have been writing posts on LinkedIn or writing posts on Facebook and tagging women who've been important to them. So I think it's a time to celebrate our successes, but also the help we've had on the way to get to where we are now. So I think you're pushing at an open door and asking all of us 5 whether Women's Day is a good idea, because the whole week is a great idea.
Yes, I agree. And I noticed it's a very positive chat and in there. Well said, Leslie. I think that was a very good soundbite there, which was appreciated by all. And I think recognizing that support and building those communities is just invaluable there. I'm just checking to see if there's... yes.
To celebrate our achievements.
And to celebrate achievements. And sharing that with other people is an important part too. And I think sometimes, and particularly in Scotland, I'm not sure about other places, success very often is seen to be you're showing off, you're behaving inappropriately, but not at all, because a joy at a success, when it's shared with someone else, surely can only be a good thing. You're encouraging others, you're sharing that joy of a certain achievement, whatever that may be at that time. All right, I'm going to probably pull this event to a close just now. I'm mindful of the time, and I just wanted to say again, just a few thank yous. So first of all, thank you very much, Melanie, for being the inspiration in pulling this together. You have been a supporter of Aurora since its inception in 2013, and we've all benefited from your constancy. Hello, there you are. From your constancy, your wisdom, and your input. So thank you very much indeed. My thanks also to the events team, to Eliza, to Julie, to Sophie, who are furiously working away in the background just to make this run as smoothly as it possibly can. Your rehearsal, your ability to give us all familiarity with the technology is very much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed. And to all of you that are currently on screen with me just now, I've got to know you a little better over the last few months as we've been preparing this, and it's been my pleasure. And thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. It's been great. Enjoy the rest of the week, the celebrations, delegates. There are plenty other events that we're celebrating at GCU. I hope you'll take some time to check them out as well. So thank you and have a good afternoon, everybody. Thank you.